Hi, my name is Kelly Roman. I'm co-founder and CEO of Wallace Labs. And I wanted to record a video where I, walk through the background of the company, my own background, and go into the details of the business and the market in a way that I haven't done before in video. So hopefully this will be interesting, whether you're an investor or customer, just interested in brain stimulation as a field. And if hopefully some young entrepreneurs who are thinking about starting a business in this field, I think hopefully I'll have some useful information to share. So, from a very high level, we operate in the brain stimulation field, which includes large devices that you go into a clinic and, a doctor will use MRIs to target certain brain regions, and people do that for the treatment of depression and actually a number of other conditions. And generally that in clinic stimulation is called TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. There's also what people know as electroshock therapy. The image of that is, from the movies, and Jack Nicholson is not how it's administered today. People they go under anesthesia. So it's a very, peaceful experience for the patient. And that can be very useful in preventing suicide. So usually if someone's suicidal, that will be something that a psychiatrist will consider using. On the other kind of end of the spectrum are these wearable devices, and that's where we are focused on. So, but even within that, there's a huge array of different kinds of devices. So I'd say on the highest complexity level, there are devices that have electrodes and sensors all over the head and are capturing brain activity with EEG in real time, and then using that information to deliver electrical stimulation. And those kind of look like caps on the head, or sometimes even without the cap, just electrodes all over the head. So that's obviously not something people are going to use a lot on their own, but that's kind of a physician or technician administered form of brain stimulation. And then on the wearable side, there aren't a lot that are commercialized today, and there's a huge variety of those. So some have electrodes on the forehead. Most of them have electrodes on the forehead, and they typically target a certain condition and a certain kind of a specific brain region. The ones that go on the forehead are targeting the prefrontal cortex, or the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which a lot of doctors believe if you stimulate that, and there's evidence of this, and that you can reduce depression. And that's actually the same location that these in-clinic devices tend to target, is prefrontal cortex. We're very different in that we put the electrodes on either side of the head, and we're actually trying to target the center brain. Those are structures like the anterior cingulate cortex, hippocampus, insula, the deeper subcortical regions, so deeper in the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, thalamus. And we have evidence that we're actually able to do that. Last year, we worked with researchers at Harvard and Mass General Hospital, and they generated what's called an electrical field model, which shows the strength of the electrical field that we're creating in these different regions, and showed that it's clinically significant. There's a threshold for those who are really technical listening to this of 0.2 volts per meter. You have to reach that in order to have a chance at influencing the activity of these regions, and we were 2 or 3 times above that. Still very safe, but well more than we need to be able to change how these structures behave. And so what we're actually trying to do, once the intention of the device and the way it's designed, is to basically calm down areas of the brain that are hyperactive So the amygdala, for instance, if you're anxious, could be hyperactive, or if you have kind of, if you have PTSD from, a tour in Iran, in Afghanistan or Iraq, which we work with a lot of veterans in that community, you can have this kind of sense of hypervigilance, which occurs, when they're driving around in Humvees and they're constantly feeling like they need that something might explode. Enemies may be shooting at them. So very active amygdala, hyperactive. And so we use a waveform and a pulse rate that is designed to calm that down. On the other hand, we also are very good at, we've shown in clinical studies at treating depression, which often means you have to increase the activity in that deeper region, the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, which is underactive if you're depressed. So what the device is doing is calming down hyperactive, bringing more activity to underactive, and then harmonizing the firing of neurons, kind of harmonizing all the electrical activity that's going on between regions and allowing for more neuroplasticity to occur, so new circuits forming. So that's the mechanism. And we get there by a patient using our device for 20 minutes. The studies we've done is 20 minutes in the morning to 20 minutes at the end of the day. And we have multiple clinical trials, which we'll get into later, that shows very rapid reduction in symptoms and durable. And so we have now been able to validate this technology as one of the most rapid treatments for depression, at least in women. We have great results with a study with women. We have a great study, treatment of anxiety, that shows, again, very rapid and durable symptom reduction in men and women. That one was specifically with first responders. We've done an insomnia study where we showed also rapid reduction of insomnia as measured in how many minutes of sleep more did a patient get as they were using the device, and versus a placebo. And so we've been able to show that we can have a really positive effect in multiple very common conditions, and as a result of focusing on that center brain activity. So that's what we've done. Now, as you can imagine, you cannot scientifically validate a device to treat all of these things very quickly. Clinical trial, just one clinical trial takes a long time. So we have done many clinical trials. And this is just that alone is one reason why a lot of medical device companies will just target one indication and prove it out there. And then that's what it gets prescribed for, and that's it. We are taking that approach sequentially with our FDA clearances and approvals. So we're going to start with anxiety, and we're moving on to insomnia and depression. But what we are working on demonstrating to everyone, medical community, patients, etc., is that we can have an impact on all of these conditions that are often comorbid, often have them together. And that really compresses the choice of what device do you want to use. I mean, would you rather use 3 devices, one for each condition? Would you rather use one? And it also creates this moat, if you will, a competition moat, because in order to compete with us, you'd have to do all of these studies with your device, and that's going to take years. So we've taken an unorthodox approach. A lot of people will say, don't do that, like just focus on one thing. But we've spent, about 15 years doing research with this technology in order to be able to do that. And we're now 2 weeks away from submitting our FDA clearance application for anxiety. I've been working on this with consultants for about a year and a half. It's an expensive, very detailed process. We had to we had our biostatistician that we were working with had to drop out from the consulting firm, and we had to restart that process again. So we've had some delays in that, but I will announce once that is fully submitted, and we are right at the finish line here on that. And it should not take more than a few months to get that. The FDA has been very responsive to us. We've spoken with them. They've been very engaged. They know that we're submitting this. Obviously, we have to check the boxes for them, but if we check the boxes, this is not going to take a long time. And we definitely check the boxes from the perspective of this consulting team, which is called Healthcare Innovation Catalysts, and they're staffed by former FDA people. So, ex FDA reviewers, ex head of biostatistics. So I couldn't have picked a better team. Very expensive. That's why we're raising money all the time with crowdfunding. But this will be the first beachhead for this new technology, this new version of this technology that we've spent all these years validating. So if you're a customer of ours, you know that we've sold devices before. And so, as we were doing all this research for 15 years, there was an FDA pathway for us to actually market and sell that research device. That path no longer exists. That was changed in 2019, the rules. But because we were into this field so early, we were able to take advantage of an archaic pathway that had been developed in the late 70s, which allowed us to market and sell this device without doing these large trials. Now, that may sound irresponsible, but in fact, we had extremely high confidence in its safety going into that. The electricity that we're giving out is nowhere near what could cause a seizure or any kind of heat. It's extremely safe, and that's evidenced by the fact that we've run about 1,500 subjects through clinical trials, and not a single serious adverse event has been reported. Headache, dizziness is very rare, temporary. That's the kind of thing that can occur. Sometimes skin irritation under the electrode site. So super safe technology. And so we were able to distribute about 92,000 of those, what I would call a proof of concept device. About 60,000 of those people still have them today. Many of them using it regularly, and we know this because they're getting replacement sponges. I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a stutter, so thanks for bearing with me. And so, we have this, which is also very unique as a startup, to have this community of customers using the research technology. And so at this point, we have very convincing evidence of safety, as well as all of these signals that we've gotten over the years from this group of our research device customers, if you will. And so we've, everything from, we're seeing patterns of reports around tinnitus improvement, people with ADHD or telling us emails and so forth, how much this is helping them, et cetera. And so what that does is that gives us, when we start seeing a pattern of that, and we're in touch with these patients all the time, then we can, say, all right, let's plan to do a study in this area down the road, or let's add this condition in a current study that we're doing as a secondary endpoint, et cetera. And so one of the things in the next study that we have that we've set up to do at Mass General Hospital for depression, for instance, is going to have a secondary endpoint on cognitive performance, because that's something that we have heard over and over and over from the customers of the version 1 device. So we're using a gold standard cognitive performance test. That's a 20-minute test on a computer where you're using keystrokes and you have to do things a certain amount of time and identify colors. And so that will give us a baseline cognitive performance and then show if the person is improving over time. We certainly expect that they will. And if that becomes a statistically significant secondary outcome, then we can actually add that to our marketing language once the FDA says it's okay. But that's typically how that works. So we could say we're approved for depression, and we also have this positive result in our studies on cognitive performance. So that's a lot. I think so this, just to recap, we have a company that has on one hand looks like it's a very established company in the sense that we've been around for I've been doing this for 17 years, but really we were an R&D team that was able to market and sell a research device. So we did, and that's why we haven't had to raise venture capital. We generated over $40 million in revenue over that period. We had a small profit over that period of time. Lots of costs involved in doing that. When you're a small device manufacturer, you're not getting a great deal on the manufacturing with the contract manufacturer. So we had expensive costs of device. We had marketing costs, but we were able to make that a profitable business, small one relative to where we want to be. But so that's very unique, and it's not something that can be repeated because that special FDA pathway it no longer exists. Now is the one that when we're submitting this application to be FDA cleared for anxiety, that's under the new rules. And any company that wants to enter this market needs to conduct clinical research for a specific indication. In our case, it was anxiety is the first one, or they can choose depression or insomnia. And if they go outside of those significantly, then there's a different path called de novo, which I'll get to a little bit later in talking about that. So we think all this is great for in terms of having these modern regulation now, which is going to keep the reputation of the category fairly high because they're requiring clinical data, and that's very important. It's important for safety. It's important for making claims, but it's also important to make sure that the category is not looked at something that's flimsy. This is a class 2 device for anxiety. A lot of class 2 devices and devices like a CPAP device, as some of you are using for sleep apnea, those devices don't have to have clinical trial data. What they have to basically do is say, look, our device is similar enough to this other device that's already on the market, but we've made these improvements here and there. And so, CPAP device companies are able to go to market without doing these kinds of clinical trials. So we're in a more highly regulated category. For depression, which is on our roadmap after anxiety, we think we can get an approval as early as the end of next year for depression. That's the highest level. It's higher than anxiety and insomnia. Depression is the highest level. It's called the PMA Class 3. That's the biggest trial that we're going to have to do. That's the one that we have planned to do at Mass General. And so, by the end of next year, we certainly have a pipeline and a plan in place that will have anxiety, depression, and insomnia. All three we can market for those, and then I think that will also give a great impression to doctors and patients that, hey, this technology is pretty special. It's able to do these things. So I think, and I have some notes here if you see me looking here. Yeah. Oh, okay. So let me talk a little bit about kind of the iteration of the device. So again, this device is something patients use 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening in the first few weeks, and then typically go down to once a day or a few times a week after their symptoms go into remission. So after they don't have the symptoms, they have the device, but they're continuing to use it because they don't want the symptoms to return. But they also have reported a lot of them that this cognitive benefit, and so that's another reason why they continue to use it. And so we have people using that device for more than 10 years at this point. And so this research device version was very simple design, headband. Basically, I think I have one around here. This is the base unit of it. So you could clip this onto your belt or hold it. Then I don't have the wires right here, but there's two wires that come out of the top of this, and then there's a headband that you're wearing, and you slide the electrodes under them on each side. So this is obviously functional, but not this is not something you would expect Apple to make. This looks very much like a medical device, hospital kind of aesthetic. And so what we did starting a few years ago is partnered with the team behind Beats headphones and the Nest thermostat and the Microsoft HoloLens. It's an engineering firm called Alloy, and industrial designer, his name is Eric Fields, and his partner Hannah Bosmark is a packaging expert. And so the grand kind of vision combination that we're looking for is this extremely high level of scientific validation, as well as world-class industrial design, a device that looks great, it's super easy to use, and is very manufacturable, even in say a supply chain crunch. So we've and I don't have that here because that's still being finished, but you can see the images of it on our website and on the campaign page. And that's a much sleeker version with no wires hanging down, and it's called Oak. So Oak is the name of this new version, and that's what we're looking to market. And a little nuance here is we're able to use these devices in research, and that are delivering this new fixed output. And then we can apply for the FDA clearance with the data from this. If it gets cleared, then we can, as long as Oak is delivering the exact same simulation, has the same electrode contact materials, has the same intended use, etc., we can just upgrade this to Oak without having to start from scratch on the FDA process. So that's how we were able to get the research done on this new version while we were also designing it on an industrial design aesthetic level. Yeah, I'm very excited to get that out there. I use this device all the time, and I love it. I love the way I feel, but I'm excited to get rid of the wires because we have red and black wires in here that I'm not crazy about wires, but they were a necessary evil that we had to use for many years. So I think one thing I want to now kind of talk about is the business and the market, and how we're going to make money. Where are we in this process? So we had to stop selling the version 1 device as a result of this FDA regulatory change in which they modernized the regulation. We stopped selling that in April of 2023, so almost 3 years ago. And again, we lost that revenue source, which wasn't great, but we've been able to crowdfund, and I've been investing, and my co-founder Chip has invested, and going on 3 years. And so, but if we can assume that we're going to have this FDA cleared, say by June, of course there's no guarantee, but we are expecting it, given we had a great study and etc., the history that we have with the FDA, etc. If we get cleared by June, we can start selling in July, or we can start selling immediately. But we would need a few weeks to get everyone ready for that, and the inventory, etc. We have manufacturer lined up to build devices, and so we'll be able to generate revenue again, which will be great. While we're waiting for Oak to be finished, which there's possibly less than 6 months of engineering left, and that's one of the things that we're raising money is to keep that process going. I'm actually tomorrow flying to our new engineering partner because Alloy, they've done most of the work on Oak, the engineering team, but they were acquired last year by a big company called Axon, which makes actually the tasers and other equipment. So they were acquired. So we're transitioning for the final stage of Oak to a new engineering firm. And so anyway, there's hopefully about 6 months of engineering left, and then we can start building the prototypes, and we got to make sure the fit is perfect, and work out any kinks and etc. Fully test it, and then we'll after all of that is done, we can bring it out to market under this FDA clearance that we will hopefully have by June. So I think revenue coming. We need the clearance. And so who are we selling this to? And I think this is a big change. The answer to that is a big change from what we did with our research device for those years. With version 1, we almost entirely sold it to patients through a telemedicine process. And we had a telemedicine partner, and we ran some advertising. We had word of mouth from providers, as our reputation kind of grew over the years in the psychiatric community. And there was no insurance reimbursement. To get insurance reimbursement, you need these large studies, etc. You often need more than just your clinical trial. You need some real world evidence a lot of the time. So people were paying out of pocket for this device. And we had a lot of prescribers in private psychiatric practices. Generally, the patients are people who can afford to pay out of pocket, who can afford to see a private psychiatrist, et cetera. Not everyone is like that, but especially in the early days, that's where we really started in New York psychiatric community. But moving forward, our biggest customers should be the U.S. government, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, the U.S. military, as well as all of the individual patients out there whose doctors will prescribe this. We'll also be starting some pilot programs with large employers so that employers can validate this to have it as a insurance, have the commercial insurance cover it for their employees. So it's going to be much more of a diversified group of customers. And the VA alone, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, has, they treated over 5 million patients last year. And, almost a third of, I think it's like 28%, receive some form of mental health treatment. So, massive need there for this. And we have a pilot program right now in the VA. So we set that up. That took 1.5 years to set up. The first patient started to be treating last month. They're running 40 subjects through this. It's called a feasibility study. And what that's really designed to do is to create a blueprint for adoption. So this study is at the Birmingham, Alabama VA, which alone serves about 70,000 patients a year. And so we'll get this blueprint. There are, I believe, 172 medical centers like Birmingham all over the country. And so we're going to be, obviously want to be prescribed in all of them. And we'll will obviously start in Birmingham. We're going to work with a company called I've had many talks with them. That's a VA and DoD specialized veteran-owned business that focuses on marketing and selling med tech into the VA and DoD. They have retired generals and admirals on their staff that doctors, and so they're a very kind of well-oiled machine and respected. And so between having this blueprint, my efforts, our business development team's efforts, and then working with this partner, we expect to scale up in the VA alone. If that's all we did, we could have a very nice business. I mean, we could theoretically become a $1 billion company just doing the VA. The military is a whole other market, different. So there's certainly a treatment need, but there's also a performance need. And so that's where that cognitive performance is important, to show them some data from that. The whole idea of using brain stimulation as a performance enhancer as opposed to a treatment is something that has been researched by the military for 25 years. I have some notes here on this. There's a couple of was it DARPA? I think it's a DARPA program that started there, and so there's been a long interest there, but they haven't found anything that really works consistently, and that also meets all their other needs for a device. Which, for instance, if you're a special operator, you don't want to have a device with Bluetooth in it, because the enemy can use that Bluetooth to locate where you are, etc. So you don't want a radio signal going out. So there's lots of kind of limiting factors with working with the military on a device that's going to be, say, used in the field. But we're perfectly suited for that. But they haven't found one. And I think one of the reasons why the military has not found a device that's reliably increasing performance, at least that I'm aware of. I think there's certainly no device that's being sold in large quantities for that in the military. Is that, and I think maybe in retrospect, because I've had so much experience using our technology on the center brain, but what you typically do if you're trying to improve performance is you would stimulate that prefrontal cortex that I was telling you about with the electrodes on the forehead, because the prefrontal cortex is involved in the decision making and situational awareness, etc. However, I think that's kind of like taking an approach of using an Amazon analogy here. The prefrontal cortex is kind of like the last mile of delivery. And so, you want to, that's where the Ring doorbell, or, if they end up using drones to deliver packages, like that last mile is kind of what the prefrontal cortex is for performance. But if you haven't been sleeping for, for months prior, if you've had a, hyperactive amygdala for months or years, no stimulation of the prefrontal cortex alone is going to suddenly correct those conditions. And I think those are actually the conditions that will, if you can mitigate that, those are the conditions that improve, if you get rid of those problems, then your performance will increase. I mean, this is well known, documented. So just getting the sleep right for these SEALs, and special operators who are operating at night and sleeping during the day. So, and they're doing that for years. So they have this sleep-wake cycle disruption that's going on chronically. So again, no, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to the research efforts that went on there, but I think our approach could in fact be exactly what they need. And, instead of saying, look, we're going to fine tune the prefrontal cortex targeting, so we're going to have a holistic approach to improving performance by for 80 to 90% of the people who are using our device are going to have some kind of clinical level benefit, which we've seen in our trials. 88% of participants in our last depression trial had a clinically meaningful reduction in depression in 4 weeks. So very high response rate. So that's kind of the pitch to the military. We'll get there. And so right now we're focused on the VA and have that going on there. But and I'm going down these tangents intentionally. I want this to be a kind of a deep dive, and I'm trying to keep as organized as I can on this. But I think it's important that, especially if you're an investor, that you get to know the business here. And there's many nuances in different channels to it. So on the performance side with the military, the other challenge, besides finding a tech that works for them and making sure that it's durable and doesn't have a radio signal and all that. And by the way, not having a radio signal means like you're not connecting it to a phone. It's not transmitting any data, which we've designed our device that way. Like we don't have Bluetooth in the device, and it's by design that we don't. It's frankly, if you're getting mental health treatment, which I have gotten with the device, the last thing I want to do is stare at my phone more. I don't want my device to be dependent on my phone. I could use the phone for tracking my symptoms. I can use the phone if I need to talk to a doctor, if I want to answer some, but I don't want to have to rely on it for using the device. And so we've already designed for that use case, and we've taken a very, I would say, first principles approach to design and stripping out anything that's not needed. The other nice thing about not having Bluetooth is, the chip that we need in the device is not hard to find, and we can source it outside of China, and there's all kinds of, it gives us a lot of flexibility on the supply chain. Okay. So the problem with, even if you have a great device, the military doesn't want to have to turn a performance enhancement process into a medical process. So therein is the conflict. Is like, all right, the tech is medical grade. That's why it's going to work for performance, but they want a way to deploy it without it being a medical process. So now, when they started 25 years ago, the FDA was much more, they were barely regulating this category at all. I mean, it was this grandfathered in thing. We weren't on the market yet. There's almost nothing that I think 25 years ago. The things that were grandfathered in weren't around anymore, et cetera. But back then, until a few years ago, the FDA kind of you could bring something to market as a wellness device that didn't make medical claims and not get an immediate letter from the FDA saying, "Hey, you can't do that." Now you can't do that. You can't go and bring a device. I can't take our technology and put it on Amazon and say, "Hey, this is just to help you focus or stress management." That's not going to fly with the FDA. So the technology itself has to be a prescription technology. Now, there's very low friction ways to do that. When you have a device that's super safe, we can go and get what's called a class 1 treatment indication. That's not even treatment. That is wellness. That is, helping to support during tasks that require focus and attention, something that's non-medical. We can still go get that. It still needs to be a prescription device, but it's regulated in the lowest device class 1, versus class 3 is depression, class 2 is anxiety. So, once we have some data on that performance piece, and the cognitive thing is part of that. Although that's with depressed patients. But once we have some data in a study from healthy individuals, then we can get that class 1 claim. It's still a prescription device, but there is, AI-enabled prescriptions for the safest low class 1 devices. That's a viable path. That's something that is beginning to get traction today in the I think it's called the Healthy Technology Act, where AI can at least start reducing the burden of human providers when it's involved in something that's really safe. So yeah, it's going to be a while until it's diagnosing for depression and prescribing. But on this class 1 level, there's a low friction way to get these devices available to the military is the bottom line. And so, this is going to be a very exciting channel for us. Now, on another note on performance, it's not just the U.S. military. Obviously, there is pro sports teams, pro athletes, all kinds of use cases for performance, cognitive or athletic, or physical. So, our devices are being used in a research capacity right now by an esports team. So that's a professional sports team of video game players, gamers. And they are tracking their biometrics using ECG or EKG. They're looking at the heart rate variability and the cardiovascular impacts, as well as EEG on the head. So they have these very robust biometric tracking of these gamers, as well as being able to track how fast are they pressing the buttons, how well are they competing. Fisher Wallace is not working with this esports team directly. There is a performance consulting firm that the esports team hired that then got these research devices. And the person who runs that company happened to, be a huge fan of us. And I didn't know this at the time. And it wasn't until after our devices were there did she reach out and say, hey, but by the way, your devices are being used in these esports team. We have to keep it confidential because they view it as a competitive advantage. They don't want, so I'm not going to say what the team is, but they're having a very, very positive experience using these, and they're seeing it in the actual wins and so forth. So we're already on our way with the performance piece. But I think the mistake that prior neuromodulation brain stimulation companies made is trying to go after performance first. Not just in the way that they did it, with not really looking at foundational brain health and sleep and mood and cognitive thing, but from just a marketing perspective. There are two companies, and I won't name them out. I never like it when a quasi competitor. We never really considered them a direct competitor, but they were two companies that had these brain stimulation wearables that were just looking at performance. And they came to market a few years ago. They were venture backed, so they actually did get venture capital by prominent firms. But their idea was, we're not going to deal with the hardcore treatment. We're just going to do on performance. And this was still at a time when the FDA wasn't as strict. They did get, kind of this, at the time, this kind of, waiver or exemption from the strict regulation. And one of the devices, stimulated the motor cortex. The other device was, again, more prefrontal. And, they ended up both going bankrupt. And I think it's, when you can't make a really strong claim, there's a few reasons why I think that happened. And this is an important lesson. If you can't make a strong claim, like a claim that says, hey, we can treat depression and we have data that shows the majority of the symptoms go down in week 1. That is so, like, people, there's such a demand that for something like that, it doesn't really exist. I mean, you have ketamine and ECT do that, but so, that's a much kind of stronger incentive for someone to change their behavior and buy it or use it than if you say, hey, this, yes, there's all these supplements, there's all these a million other things you can do to kind of try and run, a tenth of a second faster, whatever. Here's another thing. And they didn't have clinical trial data that was blowing people out of the water. They didn't have tons of science that was about there. They had some, but not anywhere near what we have developed over the years. So I think there's a credibility gap. There is just a gap in the incentives that someone had to buy this. And so, I have always looked at performance as something that should only happen after we've established it as a treatment. Just the unit economics are better. That's the other thing I mentioned, but that if you're not a medical device, you're not going to get reimbursed. You're not going to be able to demand the price of a medical device. The way that we can rationalize our price point is, hey, we have to do a lot of clinical trials here. There's a lot of regulation involved in selling our medical device, including how we run the company, how we monitor adverse events, if there are any, et cetera. So just the cost of doing this is more, but you can charge much higher price, and there's a good reason for that. And you're saying, look, when this thing works, which is in vast majority of people, we're saving you money. If we're talking to sorry about that. If we're talking to an insurance company, it's like we're going to save you money if you pay $1,500 for our device. So if instead of $1,500, if you're only getting $300, and that's, we have sold our devices for as low as $300 when people needed it, because we didn't have insurance before. Now we're, that's the whole point, is getting insurance, getting the government to pay the medical device rates, et cetera. So they were disadvantaged by that as well. And I think, so I've always wanted to build the credibility with the medical claims, get the unit economics of medical, take advantage of how frictionless we can make this with telemedicine and, AI enabled prescriptions. I mean, I think if you follow AI at all, we're obviously in the very early innings, but I'm going to be shocked if in 3 years from now, AI is not doing the depression diagnosis and prescription and follow-up. They're already showing that AI in the medical field can be a much more capable primary care. And when you combine that with robotics, there's going to be this incredible transformation of healthcare. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but I think the friction for us as a prescription device is going to be extremely low. Who doesn't have anxiety, right? Hopefully some people don't. I don't know anyone that doesn't have any, that hasn't had clinical grade anxiety for a period of time at some point, or sleep issues. So anyway, my point is, we can have this low friction and get all of the benefits of the medical field and the credibility, but still be very accessible and consumery in the user experience, the design, the brand. So, the other thing that we're doing that's different, besides obviously the technology and our clinical approach, very, very differentiated. Our industrial design, very differentiated. There's no other device that looks anything like ours, and that's attractive. It's going to come in multiple colors, etc. But the brand that I want to build around Oak, and it's very early stage. I haven't devoted that much of my time yet to it. I'm beginning to now. I spent time figuring out the brand name. I hired a branding firm to help me think about a brand strategy. But I look at this more as going in before I met with the branding agency. I want to treat this more like a Nike brand, but as a prescription device, a super credible, but actually be a aspirational kind of exciting brand. And the message is like, if you're using our device, like vast majority of people using the device are not experiencing symptoms because the thing works so quickly. And then you're like, if it doesn't work for you, you can send it back. And so people who are using it, in our depression study, most of the effect happened in the first week. And again, we had 88% had at least a clinically meaningful response in 4 weeks. 74% of the women for depression, we have to do a separate male study, but for women, 74% cut their symptoms by at least half in 4 weeks, right? So if you see someone out there using our device, very likely they don't have symptoms. And, once we start layering on the performance piece of this, and we're working with pro sports teams and U.S. military on performance, there's going to be like zero stigma around this as something like you only use when you're sick. And I really hate the burden of the language that the mental health industry uses. I know some of it's just necessary, but almost every word has a negative connotation: patient, disorder, condition. Like it kind of overly focuses on the negative without in any way being able to communicate like the positive of we're just people with brains. They're extremely sophisticated. We all have our own childhoods and whatever is impacting how our mind works. But we have to create this vocabulary around these kind of iterations of personality and the way that we respond to stimuli, et cetera. And unfortunately, a lot of that is negative. So I want to make sure that our brand is not negative. That's why I chose oak. I want strength, not something that sounds like a pharma drug, not something that's neuro this or neuro that. That's very kind of like on the nose. And like, I want like a very different positive brand. I mean, I can see an ad for oak that doesn't even mention what it does and is more like a Nike ad where you would see kind of an expression of where kind of the experience of using it, and more about the and more on the performance side. You have to be careful. You have to be compliant with FDA, of course, around the advertising. But my point is, this is the opposite of an ad for drug where you have some weird name that's kind of strangely makes sense, and then you have this monologue of side effects. Like we could almost do a SNL style spoof, right? I mean, we're like the opposite of that. So and this kind of gets me to we're already talking about marketing now. It's not an accident that I chose to work with the folks behind Beats. And if you look at the Beats story, I very much want to kind of adopt some aspects of how they became a huge brand and a widely used product, and they were ultimately acquired by Apple, and arguably because they were threatening to build a large, digital music business, and that's actually, I think, what Apple was probably acquiring. But they had, they were one of the early, if not like the first maybe firm to really leverage the notion of influencers to drive adoption. And given this intersection of performance and treatment, and we can we can tap into a lot of great stories. And just like Nike elevates and talks about the athlete, not the shoes, we can talk about the people who are using our device, and they're visionary people already who use the version 1 device. There are people who may not be famous but who are doing amazing things. And then I'm a dad, like just that, being able to function as a parent without being burdened by symptoms is a story worth telling. So, and of course, all the military related and first responder, work. So, I think the way we're going to market this over time is we're going to take a lot of cues from consumer marketing, branding, while still having our, all of the compliance. And it requires orchestration, but it's authentic to what we actually are and what we're actually doing. So I'm very excited about that. And I think, let me just recap the research we have. I've already talked about a lot of this, but I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of really how much we've accomplished over the last 15 years. So this electrical field model from Harvard Mass General last year that really validated that our stimulation is engaging these center brain structures. And before we had that, there were cynics, critics of ours who were questioning whether our stimulation was even getting through the skull. Obviously that touched a nerve when they're like, is it even getting through the skull? But, fair enough. Like the skull is has physical resistance, and that's actually something that we've designed to get through with the way that we've designed the waveform, so that we don't need a lot of electricity to pass through high resistance of the skull. But now we have evidence that shows we do that. So we also have this depression study that was published in 2024 that I mentioned that had a kind of home run with women. We have this anxiety study, which we're using as the foundation for our FDA application right now. That should be submitted in a couple of weeks. That had 164 first responders from all over the country use the device for 8 weeks. We tracked anxiety is the primary thing we tracked, but they called it a stress, resilience, and anxiety study. And we, collaborated with the Seattle Police Department on that one. They actually came to us and said, "Hey, we need a resilience program and technology. Would you do a study with us?" We said, "Sure." And then we turned that into a larger study, and we're using it for FDA. We did a bipolar depression study that was published. So that anxiety study will be published hopefully as soon as maybe even this year. And I can't say exactly how the exact stats, because that has to be saved in the article, but that was a home run. I'll say that. That study did very well. The bipolar 2 depression study that we did, published in 2015, absolute home run, but small subject size, not 164. It was like it was 16 subjects. That's a pilot study, and but it was active device versus a placebo device, which we call a sham device, which looks like it's an active device. The lights are blinking, etc. And we had a huge difference between sham and active in that study. I think we had I can quote from it actually here. We had a 13-point reduction on the Beck Depression Inventory at week 2 with active, compared to a 3.76-point reduction in the sham group. So that's like, more than a 9.25 point difference. If you know that tool, you'll know that's very good. That study was done at the Beth Israel Hospital Family Bipolar Center. Dr. Igor Galenker ran that study. He's a world-renowned bipolar researcher. The sham response, the placebo response in on-site studies tend to be less than we see when we're doing studies where it's all remote and home. Now, the device is intended to be used at home, so that's why we do a lot of home-based studies. But this one was actually done on a site, and the sham placebo response was very low. And you can find this on PubMed. When we went to home use, the sham response goes up, and we still beat it. In that depression study with women, we were twice what you would see between active and sham as an SSRI. So, we had about a 5-point difference, and SSRIs have a little over like 2.5 points in their study. So, which I don't know if everyone knows that. I mean, antidepressant medication can work, there's no question, but it doesn't work a lot in a lot of people. And when you look at their studies, it's a razor thin difference between active and placebo. And the reason for that is because mental health trials are very tricky, because the moment that you're involved in a trial as a patient, you're being cared for. You're being interviewed, the doctors are checking in with you, you got constant interaction, through, well, not constant, but you're checking in twice a day, you're being cared for. And for a study that's only 4, 8, 12 weeks, that effect of being cared for is still, it's very fresh in the first few weeks. And then what you typically should see, if you're doing like a 6-month check-in and you still have sham placebo, that should wash out, or at least go, and not completely, because you're still being cared for, but the freshness of that's kind of the thinking here. And that's not my thinking. I mean, this is how mental health trials are challenging to run. And so I think, going into a clinic is more like going to the dentist. Doing this at home remotely, you're kind of creating this twice a day self-care routine. Anyway, it has a placebo effect. So, but it's important. So as long as you're beating that significantly, which we did with the 185 women in that study, you're good to go. And then obviously the thing that really matters is, what is the response rate? No one's using a placebo device in the real world, right? No one's getting prescribed a placebo device in the real world. So practically speaking, it doesn't matter. But it does matter to get approval and for that scientific method to show that your device is better than placebo. But in the real world, everyone's getting active. And so it's that active response rate that is the thing that actually matters in the real world. And ours is extremely high. So we did an insomnia study during COVID. We had 46 people that kept the Fitbit charge on for 4 weeks. We had a lot of people in that study, despite they're getting paid, except they just took the thing off. We had people, that was a big learning experience. We had, we originally had, and this is something, we didn't publish it. It was an exploratory study that we did during COVID. I think we technically enrolled 199 people. We then shipped them. Keep in mind, we were on the market at the time, so people could go to the website and see, oh, this device costs hundreds of dollars. So we had 199 people enrolled. Half of them, once they got the device in the mail, that was it. Never heard from them again. All right, so the other half, so now we're at call it 100. Only half of them kept the Fitbit on for 4 weeks, right? Consistently. So at least we had 46 participants. Now, what that means statistically is that you have to have a pretty big difference between active and sham for it to be statistically significant, because you only have 46 people. If you had 1,000 people, then you can still have statistical significance between active and sham, but it can be razor thin, like a drug study that has typically 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people more. vaccine studies, like tens of thousands. And so anyway, we had 46 participants. We still had statistical significance at week 4 because there was just checking here, I think it was a 42.4 minute difference between active and sham in total sleep per night. So people on active, 42-minute more sleep per night, that's a lot. You're changing someone's life at 42 minutes. That's what I'm talking about. You want to improve performance. I thought a statistic for the U.S. military, I think 60% of military personnel who are surveyed get less than 7 hours of sleep a night, which is technically sleep deprivation. I know a lot of us are like, hey, 7 hours, that would be great. Technically, that you need, that's like bare minimum. But 60% are getting less than that. I'll double check after this. If it's really off, I'll post something here next to the video or something. But so boom, that alone is a performance problem, right? So you don't have to worry about like trying to fine tune prefrontal cortex. It shouldn't be your main concern. If you have 60% of your soldiers are not getting enough sleep, they have to get more sleep. We also did a PTS study. We didn't do it. Our devices were sent to 3 Ukraine hospitals by a NGO. And the doctors there recorded the results of patients using it in combination with their standard of care for PTSD versus just their standard of care for PTSD alone. And these hospitals are treating soldiers and civilians literally coming in off the front lines. I mean, front lines everywhere. All of them had been diagnosed with acute stress-related disorders. And so there was a total of 486 patients that they tracked. And this was at Kiev, Kharkiv, and Ternopil. And very big difference in the speed and the robustness of the outcomes when they combined their PTSD treatment with our device. I can just quote here, treating physicians reported sleep-wake cycle normalization. So again, talking about sleep here. So normalizing sleep-wake cycle, 89.3% of patients receiving combination therapy were able to normalize their sleep-wake cycle versus 31.5% of those receiving standard care alone. This is in the first 2 weeks. Wow. I get emotional just reading this data because I'm just like, this is awesome, right? We did a Parkinson's study at University of Maryland. That PTSD study, 480, I mean, it wasn't a randomized controlled trial, but 486 patients. The Parkinson's study, about a decade ago, that was exploratory, but it was published. And the Dr. Alon at University of Maryland was looking at gait and balance and improvements in motor function, and found that using our device, that stride length increased by 9.1 centimeters and gait velocity rose by 0.085 meters a second. Furthermore, the treatment significantly enhanced dynamic stability, as evidenced by a reduction in the number of steps required to recover balance after a backwards perturbation. And that had a p-value of 0.046. So there's very few people in here. How many? 10 participants. So the fact that there was that p-value, by the way, anything under 0.05 is considered statistically significant. This was a published study. So obviously that's a big difference between sham and active if you only have 10 subjects. And they're looking at the motor cortex. which gets back to the performance piece, right? The very first study we did, and this is the last one I'll summarize, back in 2009, Phoenix House Drug Alcohol Rehab Center evaluated 392 adults who were newly admitted into substance use rehab. And this included cocaine, crack, I'm just reading it here, heroin, alcohol, marijuana. Some people watching this are like, why is marijuana in the same sentence as crack? But they were looking at people who came in here. I think it was pretty evenly distributed around things. So a lot of heroin and cocaine, 392 people. So this was not a randomized study, but they offered the device to people who were coming into rehab if they wanted to use it while they're in rehab. And just they offered it in that first 2 weeks. And then they took the device. So the average person, I think, only got 5 treatments. And then they looked at retention at 90 days and 180 days. So basically said, all right, if the people who use the device, granted they self-selected, so they weren't just assigned the device, but people who self-selected the device stayed in rehab at a very greater rate, and there was a 50% more patients stayed in rehab if they were using the device than if not. And again, it's self-selected, so I'm not saying this is like airtight data, but that's a big. I mean, you're talking about they had 5 treatments, in the first couple of weeks, and then we're looking at them 3 months and 6 months afterwards, and that's a big retention difference. Now, you could argue someone that is self-selecting for a treatment is maybe more committed to their rehab and is going to say, yeah, sure, get it. Yeah, I mean, we're not. This was not published. We're not making claims around this, but I think that was the first indication that we had that this could be integrated into standard of care. B, people would want to use it. C, people reported huge improved sleep, reduction in anxiety. All those anxiety and insomnia when you're newly into rehab, that's high. Suddenly you're not using the drug you were using. It's very uncomfortable. People not sleeping, anxious. A lot of people are using drugs in the first place because they were anxious. So we were very pleased with that, and that kind of set us on our way. We work with some amazing researchers over the years. Today, we have 2 advisors to the company, 3. I've been talking for a long time now, so apologies. But really amazing advisory team, and one of them joined quite recently, so I'm used to saying 2. But so the 2 that have been with us for almost 2 years is Dr. Fava at Mass General. He's the head of psychiatry at Mass General. And Dr. Shulkin, who was the head of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs in Trump's first term, and then was fired, and fired by tweet, I think it was. But he did serve as the head of the VA, and has a great reputation. And so obviously we have a leader from the government sector of healthcare. We have a leader from general population healthcare at Mass General. Dr. Fava is also arguably the most renowned depression researcher, certainly one of the most renowned in the world. And he was, a main author on something called the STAR-D study, which was this landmark antidepressant study that analyzed, it's kind of considered this Bible of antidepressant analysis. and influence a lot of how the drugs are prescribed and so forth. And what he's done is he's developed these methods of testing the depressant medications in a way that tries to make them more trying to filter out some of that noise that you get in the placebo sham group that I talked about earlier. And there are ways of doing that, and that are statistically sound, clinically sound. One of them is called the sequential parallel comparison design, in which, and this is how we're structuring our upcoming study there with him. You have, let's call it 400 subjects. It's roughly how many we're planning to run through this. And you have, you're randomizing people in the beginning. Some get active devices, some get sham devices or placebo devices. You track them for 6 weeks. And then at that 6-week point, you take the group from the first 6 weeks that did not respond to sham. So people who didn't respond, like, doesn't mean they didn't respond at all, but didn't have like a high response rate to placebo or sham. Typically you could say, like, if they didn't have over 50% improvement, or there's some room on where you put the threshold, but just you take the group that didn't respond like significantly to sham, you re-randomize them to active and sham. Again, they don't know what they're getting, so they're getting a second device, they're handing back the first one, they're getting a second one, and then you track those people for the subsequent 6 weeks as well as everyone else. But then you're going to have, now if someone has not responded to sham in the first 6 weeks, you're not going to expect them to respond to sham in the second 6 weeks. But statistically, you're allowed to wait, to add a certain statistical weight to that outcome in that second 6 weeks by the sham non-responders, and use that to create your overall sham response rate in the study. And so that can succeed in lowering the overall sham response rate. Again, because you're not expecting sham non-responders to respond. And if, as long as you're doing the randomization correctly and everything else, it's valid to do that. And you do need to recruit more subjects in a regular trial. But that is one of the things we're doing in our trial with him. It's also going to have, more than twice the number of subjects as the study we published in 2024. So the goal is to have that separation between active and sham even greater than it was before. And we're doing other things that could also expand that difference even more, such as having really consistent, very robust interview process with the patients before they start treatment and enrolled. And so we're only going to work with Mass General clinicians doing those interviews. We're using a process that Dr. Fava also created for the interview process. It's like super robust and looks at medical records and trying to make sure that how treatment resistant are they, etc. So that study is what we're going to use for FDA approval for depression. So that's, again, down the road. Anxiety first, depression. Nalaka Gunaratne at University of Pennsylvania, we have worked on some NIH applications together, and I want to fund a insomnia study that he would be part of, along with Phil Garriman, who's also at UPenn, who we've worked with to do our pivotal insomnia study for FDA. And again, we have sleep, depression, and insomnia data already, but we need to have like the pivotal trial to get those approvals. And so, and then the third advisor, who is very recent, is Johan Kamperdon at Mass General and Harvard. He's the head of the neuromodulation and neuroimaging department, chief, and kind of a foundational player in this field. He and his colleague generated the electrical field model And we're going to look to publish some results around what we did there. It may not be a standalone. We may integrate it into our anxiety study. We'll see. But that really provided this mechanistic context for why we're getting such great results in the clinical trials. Moving forward, we need to get more data on mechanism. We want to get MRI data, looking at imaging of the brain, before someone uses it, after someone uses it. We want to subject, mice neurons, because you can't do this with humans. And it's, it's something, I don't like hurting animals. I mean, but we really do need to understand how the electricity affects on a neuron basis, and there's a standard way to do that, and it's not by the time we get to that, there's probably a lot of computer modeling that will answer a lot of the questions for us with the help of AI. So we'll see. Maybe we don't even have to use an actual mouse neuron. But the bottom line is we want to make the mechanism action bulletproof, and we're on our way there. And I think I have covered quite a bit here. Let me just see if okay. I'm going to go a little bit longer. If you're not going to listen any longer, I understand. So let me just run down what I think is required to win, right? To win as a business. I think you already get a sense of that already, but in terms of, I've already highlighted the channels, the sales channels. I've already highlighted this idea of design and credibility and evidence, and having a device that just doesn't do one thing, but still is able to leverage that one thing treatment in order to have business model, but we're actually can be this more expansive device that compresses the choice that someone has to make of, boy, should I use this or not? Should I prescribe this or not? From the technology itself, I think, again, we're already unique in terms of our simulation output, and really the notion of focusing on center brain and letting that success translate into the symptom reduction. But the basic boxes I think that you have to check to succeed here is, it has to be really rapid acting, no serious side effects. We've already shown this. I think there needs to be a professional brand first, and then that translates into consumer. Professional brand, whether it's the VA or U.S. military or pro sports teams, you want to have credibility not just on the science level, but on the adoption level. I think we're going to get a lot of interest from gamers who follow the players on the esports team, right? So that's a pro brand that's kind of trickles down. We need reimbursement from insurance to scale. That's going to take a couple of years it's going to take a couple of years to get full reimbursement. In the meantime, we can have the U.S. government paying the same price as insurance. So VA is both the payer and the provider, U.S. military, obviously. And we can have payment plans and financing and things to make that $1,500 roughly more of a monthly a payment for patients over that 2-year period who aren't getting it through the government, or and that's just going to be a necessary bridge until we have Medicaid, Medicare, and covered by employer plans and so forth. I think ultimately, a lot of depression drugs, anxiety drugs don't do adolescent trials, but they get prescribed for adolescents by pediatricians, doctors anyway. I think I want to do adolescent trials, and I want to have an adolescent like after we have done this necessary work with the adults is get the adolescent FDA indications. I've when my daughter had a difficult time, I was using this with her. I trust it. It's incredibly safe. It's I would much rather use this as a parent than a drug. And I think we can differentiate ourselves there. It's a huge market, and not to be like overly crassly capitalist about this, but like, because it's someone's health and it's kids, but like with Apple, they had like 5% of the overall computer market when they were getting started, but they had like 75% of the student market. So then they created this brand loyalty starting young, and that's what we can do. And I think because again, this is not just something you're using just to treat something. It's intended for lifelong, and there can be an upgrade cycle over time. Like I don't want devices getting thrown out all the time, but just because the battery dies. But like let's say every 5 years, a device with these are things can get beat up. I mean, they're things that people use every day. They're getting thrown into bags and stuff. So, and we're building it tough. So, every 5 years, I think it'd be an upgrade cycle. I think that's important. I think, while we're not going to have an app that controls the device, we're going to have a relationship with the customer, patient, outside of the VA. The VA is going to control their own thing. But in the consumer realm, this is also where I'm actually recruiting, if you will, someone who's an expert in artificial intelligence, and software development to partner with me at a very, at the C level, so that we can build a very compelling ecosystem around this that is going to include persistent wearables. Whether that's Aura or Whoop or Apple Watch, we may end up introducing our own wearable. We'll see. But that's where I think it gets very interesting and super sticky is, most wearables, well, not most, I mean, wearables don't treat, they track, right? Aura Ring doesn't treat you. It gives you the information it tracks. And then you can use that information maybe to help in diagnosis, et cetera. We're a wearable that treats. And so it makes sense to have an ecosystem of persistent tracking wearable so that you can see how's your heart rate variability, et cetera, the impact of using our device. And that can actually be used for insurance purposes. That's part of what the HHS is doing, incentivizing now, is to help get payments based on biomarker evidence and so forth. And so that's a very ripe environment, but we can also, as the esports team is beginning to do, begin to customize the usage protocol. There's a lot we can do with, and ultimately, I don't want electrodes all over the head, never have. But as AI, machine learning get a bit better and better, we should be able to have, and the design of sensors gets better and better. Once we can have really high fidelity without electrodes all over the head, and I've spoken to some people about this, then I think we will want to integrate sensors into the device, and then we can be in the data, the brain monitoring business, in the sense of like, Aura tracking. We can treat and track for brain health, and there's a whole AI piece to that as well, including if we're monitoring brain activity. Someone starts taking a new medication for heart condition or whatever, getting that feedback will be very important. So there's a huge data piece to this, and user experience piece to this, which I'm not going to focus on too much today. But I've spent all these years building this incredible hardware platform. So I'm not going out to a thought leader in artificial intelligence saying, hey, please, help me turn this into a business. Like, I already have a business. We already have an incredible hardware platform. And I think this is the perfect time to get someone involved in that, both from just a stage of the company, a stage of where we're at, as well as just the state of where artificial intelligence is today. I'm glad I didn't lock us into some software paradigm 4 years ago when I was starting to do research that I now have to extract myself from. It's good to get started right now after we've built all this credibility. So, ease of use, super important. There's nothing easier to use that I've ever seen than ours. There is nothing as attractive, nothing as easy to use. And that matters. You can have the most amazing treatment in the world and no one wants to wear it, or if it's burdensome or uncomfortable, right? I mean, you need adoption to make any treatment work. You need adherence and adoption. And I think having a beautiful device will allow it to become naturally enter the mental health or the human performance or eventually I'm sure there'll be mothers or women who are pregnant talking about using the device during, or we can't do that now. We don't have a pregnancy, but at some point, if we can, I would love to do a pregnancy study. And who wants to take antidepressants while you're breastfeeding or while you're carrying a baby? And so my point is that these conversations, wherever the community is, there's now a physical object that becomes part of that social interaction about it, right? You don't see a pill, really. You don't, like, psychotherapy, digital psychotherapy isn't like an object. So this is a very important marketing advantage of having a beautiful object to enter these conversations. So I think we've checked all of the boxes that could be checked. We've done incredible amount of work. We've already been through the FDA process. Extremely, very high confidence in getting through this phase we're in right now with the FDA very quickly, and getting on to generating revenue, becoming profitable, and being able to be really thoughtful and thorough in our channel development and make this, a hugely adopted product with a lifetime life cycle of use, and then start building a lot of other things around this. This is really kind of a foundational product that we can build a company and an ecosystem around. So I think I'm just looking here. Yeah, I'll speak a little bit about. Last part about the device here is, we have taken a very contrarian approach to just about everything about it. The waveform, we use a square waveform, but every other device I've seen has been sine wave. There's technical details, but we've made some choices very thoughtfully about why we're using the waveform characteristics that we are. It appears to be working very well in our studies, etc. But we're also not building in complexity for the sake of it. So not having sensor stacks. I've never seen a EEG enabled device that gets better results than we got in the depression study. In fact, a lot of them are getting worse, quite a bit worse results. So if you're not, there's not much room to go if you have 88% of your patients with a clinically meaningful response. Like, why burden it all with sensors? And, if we're able to get that with 2 electrodes, that's it. That's not only great for user experience, it's great for supply chain. That's great for, manufacturing. There's fewer failure modes. That means a lot less customer service, a lot less bad reviews. Uh, so, we have a lot of advantages on the manufacturer side. It's less expensive to manufacture, better margin, etc. So yeah, I think I guess what I'm saying is I think we've thought through just about everything that I think we need to do to succeed. We're creating the conditions for success. Nothing's guaranteed. But we have put in enormous amount of work. I think our product, our technology is really in the national interest. There's a whole movement Andreessen Horowitz's venture capital firm, I don't know if they coined it, but they have the whole division called American Dynamism, which invests in companies where the government is primary customer and companies that are getting America more competitive in different areas. And the defense tech is an example, right? The Defense Department of War, Department of Defense, before the idea is like, let's have these super expensive, highly complex F-35s and, bombers, et cetera. And not that those are completely irrelevant, but, there's companies like Anduril, which are saying, hey, instead of having 10 of those things, you could have 1 million of these drones and actually be a lot more effective executing your defensive strategy in, say, a conflict with China or in Taiwan or et cetera. And so it's this idea of like leveraging technology and kind of and practices that have become more common in consumer technologies and so forth into these government sectors and creating like affordable mass or just making the U.S. more competitive. They don't include healthcare in their focus, but I put our company directly into this group for the reasons that I already talked about today. Whether we're treating first responders, active duty, and we have active duty treatment site, by the way, joining this VA pilot program that we already have going on. I can't announce that name yet, but we have an active duty PTSD treatment site that's in the process of joining. So in terms of U.S. military, we're going to have treatment and performance is what we're planning to do there. So this is a national interest company. And then of course, if we're succeed in having massive scale, then there's a lot of focus correctly on artificial intelligence and the productivity improvements. There's a lot of focus on companies like Palantir and Anduril and how they're modernizing and software and hardware of the military. There's not a lot of focus on people, like the brain and all the human beings involved in this. That is another productivity driver, brain health. Your performance and human performance matters, not just in the military, but across the whole population. If you're getting better sleep, you don't have anxiety, depression. Not that you'll never, ever have anxiety. There's life, but like not having it at this clinical debilitating level, not having sleep where you just can't sleep for weeks and months like that. That's what bringing balance back to the functioning of the center brain can get rid of those kinds of conditions for most people. That is extremely valuable. And so, there's artificial intelligence, there's human intelligence. We're on the human intelligence side. We may be using artificial intelligence in the background to do some things with that ecosystem, but I think there's a hugely important upside both to performance and to saving healthcare. Again, that's what the point I was trying to make. If you don't have these conditions, you're less likely to have to be hospitalized. You're less likely to have a whole host of conditions. It's kind of like with weight loss, with the GLP-1s. If they can reduce, which they already are on their way, obesity, then all the other things go down, right? This is in that category of innovation. We need to prove it out to the extent that GLP-1s have, but we're not there yet. But like that's the kind of impact that I think this can have. I'm going to leave it at that. I am losing my voice already. So it has actually been really fun going through this, and I may not do one this long again for a while, but I will definitely work on shorter ones. One of the questions I sometimes get is, or I've also thought about is like, sometimes companies can be considered too early or too late to a moment where there's an inflection point. I don't think we're either. I don't think, we're not it's not like we're trying to bring a smartphone out to a market that doesn't have broadband cell service yet, or doesn't have Wi-Fi. Like, we're not too early from a technological perspective. I think what was too early was trying to go to market without all of the credentials that we're building. That's too early. It takes many years to get to where we are today. And I know a typical startup, like 15 years, it's not a startup. Well, it is if you're doing years of clinical research to try and validate a technology. That doesn't happen overnight. We could have gone a little bit faster if we were venture backed, but not that much faster. We've raised about $11 million from our customers through equity crowdfunding. So people average investment between $1,000 and $1,500. We have thousands of investors. They're all shown on the cap table by the campaign as like an SPV. But we are a patient-owned company right now. I include myself in that. And we've been able to do all this without venture, which is really a round of applause for the investors, all these people who have put in their hard-earned money. It's actually quite something. So I think the next phase is going to be interesting. I would like to bring in some venture capital finally for this growth phase that we're going to go in to fund the depression study, to hit it out of the park with the marketing and et cetera. So hopefully we'll be able to raise that once we're cleared. I think that may be the inflection point for venture capital. I always point to the fact that I'm not Elon Musk, but like when he brought Tesla and SpaceX he had to get to an incredibly far point in those businesses before he raised institutional capital. I think with SpaceX, he actually had to achieve orbital flight before like big institutional investors came in. So, this is par for the course. And so, yeah, I guess I want to thank the investors. I think we are, and I know it's taken a long time to get finished. Timelines for me are a little bit different than I think for most entrepreneurs. But we're ready to make a huge impact and to grow a huge business. So, all right, thanks a lot.